This is the 7th lecture based on the Course in Miracles. We're doing the entire text of the Course in Miracles. 31 chapters is going to take us about 3 years. We're up to chapter 5 today. 5 is essentially about the role of the Holy Spirit, which is a very, very, very important concept in the Course. It also has a lot to do with choice and decision making that we find in the Course as well, and it also talks about guilt a bit, and we're going to find guilt coming up in much more detail in chapter 13. The whole chapter is on guilt. And what we do is we're going to go over 50 minutes, we take a 10-minute break, we go over 50 minutes, we take another 10-minute break, and that sort of fills out the day. I guess let's get into it, all right? Let me read what I'm going to sort of give me time to kind of get through some of the basic material here, and before we get to the questions and answer section, right? Or it doesn't have to be questions and answers, just be an observation. If you have an observation you'd like to share. I want to begin by reading, if you all have your handout sheets? Yes. There are 12 pages this time. I'm sorry, I just couldn't stop. 1 second. Eric, you don't have one? You can get them. While Eric and John are out there, on here, by the way, I listed some of the local groups. Yasko has a group 3 times a week here. On 8 o'clock on Monday and Tuesday and 2 o'clock on Thursday. And then Eric, we just left to get the notes, has a group that meets on Wednesdays from 7 to 9 on 9th Avenue.
They're going to make
Is they out? It should be fun. All right, the Holy Spirit. Let me read you this first part. The Holy Spirit is the perfect teacher. He uses only what your mind already understands to teach you that you do not understand it. Now that may sound like gobbledygook or a little backward sort of thinking, but keep in mind one of the lines in the Course which is really important is that everyone already knows. Okay, so if everyone already knows, and everyone already has the truth within them, our basic job then is not to discover what the truth is, but to remove the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. So all we're doing is removing the blocks, so we're just uncovering what's already there, which we already know, which may come up as kind of an aha kind of an experience for you, but when you have an aha experience, you're just seeing something that's always been there. And for some reason, your eyes have just now been cleared. Your eyes in a symbolic sense of what we mean. Going on with this quote. The Holy Spirit can deal with a reluctant learner without going counter to his mind, because part of it is still for God. So again, the Course says we all have split minds. We're divided between the ego and the Holy Spirit. And guess who kind of wins most of the time? At least historically, it's been the ego. So what we're trying to do is to switch that over so that we're giving more and more and more of the mind to the Holy Spirit or to divine guidance till we get to the point where really you want to get to the point where you don't even think. I mean, you don't even think you think, but you're not thinking about decision making. The decision is clear. You simply do what you're being asked to do. And that's where the ego gets resistant, but that's also where spirit experiences incredible freedom. There's nothing like doing what God would have us do with our lives to make us really happy, right? Because that's what you want to do. That's what you want to do more than anything else, is what's already there, right? Then let's also look on the right-hand side of the first page. That part, the invitation to the Holy Spirit, And the first part of that is from Living A Course in Miracles, but let me just sort of read through it a little bit. The Holy Spirit is the voice for God. That's one of the most common phrases for what the Holy Spirit is. It's the Christ mind, the light, the bridge to heaven, communication link between ourselves and God, the thought in the mind of God, which helps me to understand my right mind. So very often people will think that they should be hearing a voice when you hear the voice of the Holy Spirit, and it's really not like that, because it is a thought. It's a thought of inspiration. If you think about some time when you've been inspired maybe to write a poem or to compose a song or something, and the words just begin to appear to you as though it's being given to you, you really don't have to think very much about what it is that's given to you. You just accept it. Going on down, it's the motivation for miracle-mindedness. The word motivation is an interesting word. We have a lot of decision-making to do here, but we got to talk about how we get that decision-making process going in the right direction, right? And it of course does talk about in this chapter in terms of strengthening the motivation for change, and the way we strengthen it, it's like pumping a pump. It's like getting the thing started. You know, once you get it going in the right direction, you're making the right decisions, then the more easy it is to make the right decisions, the more easy it is to make the right decisions. It's just like you're going in a negative downward spiral and you can't stop it. You know what that's like, to be caught in an addiction or something. Well, now we're starting to go the other way, but the more we can get it right, 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 without falling back down. So there's the decision to heal the separation. And the primary ways that we talk about it are, it's the inner teacher. Helen Schuckman, I remember at one point said, the main purpose of the Course, this is the main purpose of the Course, coming from, described from the Course, right? Said the main purpose was to get us in touch with the inner teacher. And first of all, to recognize that there is an inner teacher, which is a wise teacher who knows the right answer to everything. So the inner teacher, comforter, healer, guide, mediator. There's an interesting passage that comes from the Gospels where Jesus says to the disciples, he's about to go be crucified, right? So this is just prior to this. He said, it is important that I go, because if I do not go, the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, cannot come to you. And I think the reason for that is because the disciples are no doubt so enamored by his personality and his person that they didn't realize that it was in them as well. And the only way that they could realize that this was in them as well is if he wasn't there. Then they would have to rely on their own resources. They'd have to make this discovery for themselves inside themselves. And we really still have that same job. And we're still really just, he says many times in the Course, what I have done, you could do. He says that also in the Gospels. So we're just beginning to do what he's discovered that you could do, to remember God. Most of the time it's a thought. I've noticed, however, in talking to people, after I wrote this book called Listening to Your Inner Guide several years ago, I ran around for a couple years thereafter leading workshops on listening to inner guidance, and I would have people telling me about experiences they had where they actually feel as though they've heard a voice, right? And then you feel like it was external, like it was really an external voice. Right? Well, often people do feel this, and it's interesting to make note of the circumstances under which those occur. And I've noticed it usually occurs when one is in a kind of a crash and burn situation or a desperate situation where they really need to hear. and, and they kind of even sort of give up. Or one woman told me that she screamed out at God. In the process of the screaming out, she got an answer. It's like, oh, didn't really expect it to be an answer, but the answer came at this point of incredible desperation. I have in both this book and Living A Course in Miracles, I have some examples. Maybe I'll read some of those after the break of what people actually. It's usually something that's very comforting, something that's very reassuring. It'll never be anything that would upset you or distract you. It'll be quite the opposite from that. It's something that would make you feel good, like this is what was supposed to happen. And so it's okay. You're okay. You've done nothing wrong. I'm here to help you. These are kind of things that people have heard. The bottom of the first page is that we're reenacting the Civil War. What I mean by reenacting the Civil War is that the reason we have resistance to hearing the voice for God is that we keep reenacting this. You know how every summer there'll be reenactments of the Civil War? Well, the reenactment of the Civil War that we have with ourselves is with our brothers and our sisters, finding a fault or finding a problem, but it's also the first split, the big split that occurred when we broke away from God. That's kind of the first Civil War, when we're actually leaving home. Right? Turning to the next page. Two. All right, let's talk about some of the symbols for the Holy Spirit. First, I mentioned sex and the Holy Spirit. The word he or his is used throughout the Course to refer to the Holy Spirit, but let's keep in mind that it's just a word, a phraseology, it's a way of talking about it. The Holy Spirit has no sex, it's not female or male. And the fact is, when you get way down in the Course, where is it? I think much later in the Course you'll find at one point it says that the Holy Spirit is an illusion. Now what it means when it says it's an illusion, it's really that it's a symbol that we need to help us understand. But in the long-term sense of the thing, there's no Holy Spirit. Or another way you could say it is that you are the Holy Spirit. Once the voice becomes your voice, then there's no difference. Jesus said there's no difference between him and the Father. And this is what he realized, that once he allowed the Holy Spirit to speak through him so completely that there was just one voice speaking at that point, which we could also again refer to as the voice for God. Right? Sometimes I will say to people, I think we did even the first day of class, I think actually Charles brought this up when we talked about who wrote the Course in Miracles. And I said, well, Jesus wrote it. I mean, it's Jesus that's speaking, but Jesus inspired by the Holy Spirit. But then I also said, but it's you wrote it. From your right mind, from the Christ mind. If you're a part of the Christ mind, and you're a part of the wholeness, then you wrote it as well. Right? This is your memory of what the truth is. So, in that, we were talking coming down in the car with Brad and Shanti earlier, that the Course says everything is an idea. This is very important. Now, an idea is a real thing, but an idea doesn't have a form. It's very important that this is all formlessness. Love doesn't have a form. Truth doesn't have a form. God doesn't have a form. There's nothing physical about this at all. It's actually that which is most real is not physical, because everything which is physical disappears, changes, disintegrates, decays, rusts, rots, turns. It doesn't have any eternity in it. But eternity certainly exists within the mind, within the concept, within the idea. That's where it is. And this is an ideal. Now, so the symbols that we tend to use, one is a dove, of course, because that also stands for peace. Another one of the older symbols for the Holy Spirit is fire. And the reason for fire is that it has this quality of purification, of burning off the sloth, of getting rid of the unessential so that only the essential may then remain. Another symbol is oil, but perhaps the best symbol of all is actually the word is spire. When we get the word spirit, means blowing, wind, breath, air. So blowing, wind, breath, air are all really good because they're invisible. And you can see the effects of the wind in the trees, but you don't see the wind. You just see what the wind, you see what the wind does, right? And then of course the best one of all is that it's a voice. Because without the voice, we really have nothing. But the voice is all a matter of air, right? Going across the vocal cords. Let's read on the right side of page 2 from the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. The darkness in that the ego would be a symbol for darkness, just as light is the symbol for God or for the Holy Spirit in our lives. Also, let's look at the bottom of the left side on page 2, the choice for heaven. Of course, it's telling us, Jesus, because I made the choice for the right mind. By the way, the Course talks about wrong-mindedness and right-mindedness. We know the wrong-mindedness is the ego mind. Right-mindedness is the mind that's in line with the mind of God. First, we have to get to right-mindedness before we can get eventually to one-mindedness. One-mindedness will be the complete mind, completely returned back to the mind of God. So you got to get to right-mindedness first, and then it says in the very, very end, God takes the last step and sort of pulls you on over. Did I give the gecko illustration? A year or so ago, Geico's gecko. There was one of their silly ads had him walking a little close to a vacuum tube, and when he got a little too close to the vacuum tube, you're right. And I think that's kind of the way it works. But I mean, this is what grace is. I mean, the way it works is you keep getting it right, and you keep getting it right, and you keep getting it right. You get closer and closer to that 100% right, and on the last step, God steps in and makes the last step. It just pulls you on over into reality. Right? You don't have to make that last step yourself. You're so close. It's like capillary action. Capillary action where you get two pieces of water, and if they get real close together, then all of a sudden it's right. It's just a magnet. Yeah, it's like a magnet, right? The magnet. If the magnets get close enough, all of a sudden they come together. So it's one and the same thing. Right? They're homing. Again, back to the bottom of page 2 on the left. The choice for heaven. Because Jesus made this choice, we can as well. And the Course describes the process. This is a process of reawakening. Number 1, thoughts increase by being given away. That's part of what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we're sharing these ideas. We're giving these ideas away, which, in terms of the Course, enriches both the giver and the receiver. Nothing can be lost in this process. The only thing is that we can all gain by it. I often begin the class by saying a good teacher clarifies his own ideas and strengthens them by teaching. And so that's what the Course is asking you to do too, is to strengthen these ideas inside yourself by teaching these ideas. And of course, the way we teach these ideas is that we live these ideas. And as we live these ideas, then it's inevitable that even if you don't say anything, people will see that you are a manifestation of the right ideas. I think that's part of, we're all recognizing the passing of Nelson Mandela these last few days, and really what he stood for was the right idea. Right? I mean, he also had a wonderful smile.
Yeah.
You gotta admit, right? I mean, a smile that wouldn't quit. And it was sort of permanently on there. You know? So it was the right idea, being expressed in the right kind of a way, and it inevitably pulled everybody along with it, a lot of praise. So, back to the bottom of the left one too. Thoughts increase by being given away. The more who believe in them, the stronger they become. That should be obvious. And then this line from the Course, this is a direct line from the Course. Now, everything is an idea. Everything is an idea. And again, keeping in mind, an idea does not have form. It can have form if a builder wants to build a building, he has the idea about building the building, gives it to the architect puts the idea on paper, and then the builder turns it into form. It never has to get to form, however, and even if it does get to form, it will not last forever. It's all temporal. How then can giving and losing be associated? They can't. Going into the second part of this chapter, the voice for God, the Holy Spirit is in you in a very literal sense. And we say in a very literal sense, we don't mean not in your body, but in your mind. That's where the literal part of it is. This is the voice that calls you back to where you were before and will be again. Actually, the place, that's sort of one of those flipper kind of the place you were before and will be again. Another way we could talk about that is a place you never left. If it's a place you were before and you will be again, actually you never left there. And that is symbolized in the Course by, if we're going home, and what we're doing right now is that we're sleeping. When we awaken from sleeping, like if you were sleeping last night and you were having a dream last night, and while you were dreaming the dream seemed quite real, and then you woke up and you opened your eyes and you saw you never left your bed. You were always there. Well, try to imagine that we're all already in heaven. It's all already real, but we're having what the Course says, your nighttime dream, your daytime dream has a different form, and that's all. So we're dreaming this dream, and we're dreaming it in concert, obviously, because we're sharing it with each other, and we're making it up just all sorts of very strange ways, of course. We always do that. Different societies, different cultures have ways of making up what we think the dream is, right? So blowing wind, breath, air is all related to, we think it's related to life. You know, you can live for days without food and hours without water, but you can't live for more than a couple of minutes without air. And we literally say when someone has died that they have expired, meaning that somehow or another the soul and the body are no longer connected at that point. So there's a very literal kind of connection between the breath and the soul. And let's go to page 3. The picture on the top of 3, by the way, for those who are watching this on YouTube, all of these notes are online at our website, which is marysmagazine.org. Just go there Yes.
I
Larry?
should mention for those viewing that way, that the columns and the pagination do not appear in the online version.
Oh, okay.
Everything is centered
It's
on the
straight.
page, and you just have to
Alright.
scroll to
To scroll
where the
where
heading
topic
is. Yeah.
All right, got it. So the picture on the top of 3 actually hangs over my desk. I kind of like it as just sort of a memory. This is an angel. There'll be another way that we would think of the voice of the Holy Spirit dictating the gospel to St. Matthew, the evangelist, right? Let me read you that first quote on page 3. The voice of the Holy Spirit does not command because it is incapable of arrogance. It does not demand because it does not seek control. It does not overcome because it does not attack. It merely reminds. Or again, we're bringing it back to the mind. We're remembering, reconnecting, recognizing what we already know. It is compelling only because of what it reminds you of. It brings to your mind the other way, remaining quiet even in the midst of turmoil you may make. The voice for God is always quiet because it speaks of peace. So we can be sure that when the ego's in charge, we have chaos, and it's very loud, and it's often very angry, and it's often very warlike. And you can be sure if that's what's happening, it's not the voice of the Holy Spirit that we're listening to, it's the voice of the ego, which is telling us that it's justifiable anger is okay in this case, and of course that would never be the case. And again, let me read to you from the right-hand column. I like this line, I'm sorry, the bottom of 3 before we go there. It is possible even in this world to hear only that voice and no other. Now, I emphasize the fact it takes great effort and great willingness to learn. Now, later on in the course, it's going to talk about what it calls a little willingness. But here in the very beginning, in chapter 5, it's talking about a great willingness. It requires, you gotta want to. You gotta really want to be able to get into it. Meditation is a good process for this, but you don't have to meditate as well. This can come to you while you're commuting. It can come at any time. Right? It is the final lesson that I learned. This is Jesus speaking, right? And God's Son are as equal as learners as they are as sons. Then I have a quote from Victor Hugo: people do not lack strength, they lack will. Now this is really an important question, and it's talked about quite a lot in the course, and that is, what does it take to change the mind? We know what's required, what we need to do, but how do you do it? Where is the will to do it? Let's take something very, very, very obvious, something that probably everyone in this room has, maybe a few exceptions, thought about a great deal: losing weight. See, we can identify with this one, right? Because losing weight is easy. Don't forget about diets, right? All you need is a decision that you're going to do it. Somewhere there's got to be a mind that says, I'm going to make this possible, right? I'm willing to follow through on this. This is important enough to me that I can do this. If it's important enough to you, you will do it. That's a very simple kind of an illustration. But here what we're asking is, be willing to hear my voice, but you got to want to do it. You got to want to listen. You can't just say, well, it'd be nice to be able to hear the voice of the Holy Spirit. One of the reasons that we study A Course in Miracles is because it has this consistent process of helping us to get more clarity about what it means to hear that voice and to follow that voice. And very often what the voice says, by the way, is be quiet. No, I mean, notice how often when you get to the end of one of the workbook lessons, at the end of the workbook lesson, it'll say, now be still. Right? In other words, now let this sink into you, right? That's why I say it's a really good idea to do the workbook. If you're going to do the workbook, and at some point, if you're going to be a serious Course in Miracles student, you've got to do the workbook, right? But to do it in the morning and at night. Make it like the first thing you do and the last thing you do, so that you actually go to sleep with the idea, right? Go to bed with the Course, right? But if you take that idea with you, and then it actually talks about quiet dreams that you can have, peaceful dreams. And then I love this line. This is not from this section, but I wanted to bring it up. So it takes great effort and willing to learn. But this is as rest comes from waking, not from sleeping. Why would rest come from waking, not from sleeping? Sleeping is withdrawing, waking is joining. See, sleeping is not looking. Sleeping is going unconscious. Sleeping is not paying attention. Sleeping is doing all the different kinds of things that we can do to kind of knock ourselves out so we don't pay attention. And of course the world is filled with alcohol and drugs and television and a myriad of different ways that we can kind of, quote, zone out, if you will, and not look. Just, it's an easy solution. Just don't look. But it doesn't make you feel good. On the other hand, rest comes from waking. It's very exciting when it's working right, when you're at peace, then you're awaking. You're awake, literally awake, and you're feeling good, right? Because you're getting it right. You're doing what's being asked of you to do. You're following the procedure correctly. And the funny thing I think about this is that, of course, it just takes a little bit, sometimes just a little bit of effort. I mean, it's like again, priming the pump. You just got to get it started. If you just get it started, then it'll take on an energy of its own. But you got to start the process of going that way, of going toward the right mind. All right, now we'll go on to 4. So, one of the reasons that we resist this is that we actually like to fight. We like to find problems. This is the ego part now. The ego part of us wants to find a problem. We want to find difficulties in the world. We want to find something we can argue about. We want to find something that we can complain about. We don't really like to do this, but we think that we like to do this, right? So we get together over coffee and tea or whatever that we do, and we just find something to bitch about. And it's not hard. There's always plenty of topics that are readily available for us to fall into. And when you see it happening, with your friends, then there's, you have to make a decision of whether you're going to play this game or whether you're going to try to change the conversation or you're going to leave and not play this silly game, the victimhood type of game, for example, right? That we often like to play. So the Course is really, it's all about this decision-making process and getting us actually the first step. Keep in mind there are 3 minds. There's the ego mind, there's the decision-making mind, and the right mind. The Course is addressed to the decision-making mind. It's trying to help us to move from wrong mind, ego, to the decision-making mind, which then can make the right choice. But it's that choice that's a really important factor in there. And we all know, it happens really practically every moment of every day. We're constantly a choice. It's a simple decision, But the temptation to go the wrong way can be really pretty great. So, I'll read another passage on page 4. Your will is still in you because God placed it in your mind. And although you can keep it asleep, you cannot obliterate it. So we can keep it asleep, but it's going to, it gnaws at us, right? You can't obliterate it. There's always something there that's kind of saying, but there must be a better way. There's got to be another way. This is how the Course in Miracles itself gets started. The recognition there's got to be another way. And there is another way. God Himself keeps your will alive by transmitting it from His mind to yours as long as there's time. The miracle itself is a reflection of this union of will between the Father and the Son. So it's hard to place enough emphasis upon this concept of will. It's like, you know the old saying, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? So we can provide you with all the proper information. Let's say you don't need to learn how to do diets. There's plenty of diets out there. Just pick a diet. They all work. It's not which one works and which one doesn't work. What works is your decision to do one of them. And if you make the decision to do it, it works for you. Going on, still on page 4. What profit it a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? You are listening to the wrong voice. You have lost. If you are listening to the wrong voice, you have lost sight of your soul. You cannot lose it, but you cannot know it. It therefore is lost to you until you choose right. I may have mentioned before, the Course uses the word spirit a lot more than it does the word soul. It does use the word soul as it did in this case here, but the reason it uses the word spirit instead of soul is that we tend to associate soul with personality. So that we would say poor soul or sad soul or something like that. So it looks like we're talking about an individual. We're really talking about something that transcends individuality when we talk about the spirit, which is where we all are. We're all spirit. Going on down. The Holy Spirit is your guide in choosing. He is the part of your mind that always speaks for the right choice. And see, of course, this says the ego always speaks first. So seeing how the ego always speaks first, what you really want to do is just kind of listen to the ego's voice. And then after you hear what the ego's voice says, then say, no, thank you. There must be another way. And that will become clear to you. All it is just whatever the opposite of what the ego said is, be angry, get upset, attack, gossip, whatever it is just go the other way with that. Right? And very often it's just be quiet. The Holy Spirit is your guide in choosing. He's the part of your mind that always speaks for the right choice because He speaks for God. He is your remaining communication with God, which you can interrupt but cannot destroy. So the course of this communication is always there. So there's never a time that God's voice isn't speaking to you. We've used the GPS illustration for that in the past, as you're always being given the right coordinates and the right direction, but you're a choice as to whether or not you're going to follow those coordinates and do what God's asking you to do. On to the upper right-hand side of 4. Because God's equal sons have everything, they cannot compete. Yet, if they perceive one of their brothers as anything other than perfect equals, the idea of competition has entered the mind. So this is a difficult idea for us because we are always competing. Right? One of the reasons we have sports, I'm sorry to tell you this, but there's no golf in heaven. There's no sports in heaven. There's no body in heaven. Right? a body, all those are body kinds of activities and things, which are thrills for the body, like skiing or something is a thrill for the body. And this is really hard for us to imagine, but we just have to try to imagine it. But if you read Anita Morjani's book, Dying to Be Me, you see very, very clearly that she's talking about a non-physical dimension to the reality that she perceives. And a very important part of that is communication. And she feels as though she's communicating with her father and with her friend who passed away before her. That's a joining. That's what's happening on the level of mind, which we just have, I think, really the vaguest sense of. And yet when we awaken to it, we have this great revelation that that's the way things have always been. That's why I said before, don't expect to see your mother when you die, because there's no body there. But you can assume that heart connection that you had with that once upon a time person is very, very much there, and that can never die, and that can never go away. In fact, that's an integral part. We need symbols. We need physicality to talk about. That's why we talk about the Holy Spirit like the Holy Spirit is a he or a she. Right? There's no he or she. Somebody tried to find a word once where they could combine it, like he and she and it, and it just turned into. I'm going further with that. Eric.
Part of what I think, what I'm thinking about right now is how there's a lot of.
Do me a favor and speak up, Eric, for two reasons. So everybody can hear you, and also so the mic.
There's a lot of people that we might say, I have to drop them. They, are bringing me down, or it's too difficult to be with them. They are.
Mm-hmm.
They are hurting me in some way. And there was somebody wrote me something that was talking about that, and we are all from the same place, the same run. To think that others do things to us can remove us from our peace of mind. This is the definition of being at the mercy of the world.
Right.
I can at the very least realize I am creating my own expectations of my brother. I may feel I can't deal with another's energy, but it's always me that can't deal.
Right. So the course says you make up an ego for yourself, and you also make an ego for everybody else. Right? So, but it doesn't make any difference what's going on with anybody else. Right? No difference at all. That's why the best example, this is one of the reasons that Jesus goes to the cross. He really goes to the cross to show us that here's this most outrageous thing that one human being can do to another human being, is to crucify this body. And he says, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do, which, not that God needed any instruction, but just so we would understand, it doesn't make any difference what's going on, what's happening with sticks and stones may break my bones, words will never hurt me, unless I decide that the words can hurt me. But only an ego could make that decision. Only an ego could think that you could be hurt. If you know who you are, could you imagine Jesus being insulted? It wouldn't work, right? There's just nothing that could be said. And in the same way, there's absolutely nothing that can be said that would be attack on you, except on your ego level, you would think that you could be attacked. Yes. Jim.
I have a question about Freud. When Freud was developing his theories, most of his patients were very damaged people, and of course, in the Victorian era, very repressive society. And I'm just wondering if his theories might have taken a different evolution had he been studying people like, say, Leonardo or Newton or Mozart, people who were creative and not, psychotic and, sociopaths and so on.
Right.
And because, I mean, all we have is the results of him studying really fucked up people, basically. So I'm just wondering if that
Well,
was
it's not
something.
just that he's studying those, keep in mind the time he lived in.
Yeah.
I mean, he died in 1949, right? So he lived through the Depression and the Second World War, and he was a Jew
Right.
in Austria at the time, and he didn't. He was seeing all how insane the ego could be was being manifest all around him. He kept thinking that no, they couldn't possibly, and then they would. You know, I mean, so he had to escape and get out of Austria before he went to one of the ovens himself. Right?
I know it's a rhetorical question, but I'm
Right.
just curious, you know, what would have happened had he been.
Setting a healthy person.
Yeah, and creative types and so on.
Right. I think the thing is, well, later on, humanistic psychology did do that, but that's not the way it is in most of the world. The world is crazy, right? And Freud did have it right. And that's
I
why-
sometimes think the Earth is the insane asylum for the universe.
Right.
You know, it's,
Well, Aldous Huxley said that maybe this is another planet's hell,
yeah,
which is the same kind of an idea.
right.
Right, because as long as the egos rule, everybody's going to be unhappy. This is the course is all about. My next book, which is coming out in April, by the way, I just got word today, or this week is for sure, is on happiness. It's Perfect Happiness is the title, and that's a concept that's very clear in the course. When I first told my publisher about the idea I had for the book, he said, no way. He says, I published a lot of books on happiness and it's not making anybody happy. And I said, yeah, but that's because, you know, they're saying you can be happier because you've got more money in the bank or a nicer body or a better relationship or whatever it is. What we're talking about here is being happy because your mind is clean. Your mind is clear. You know, that's what, it has nothing to do with any kind of outside circumstances at all. That's perfect. That leads to perfect happiness. Perfect happiness would be the equivalent of enlightenment, or the perfect happiness would be the equivalent of heaven. Lesson 101 from the Course is God's will for me is perfect happiness. It's perfect happiness because you are perfect. Now, you don't believe that. On an ego level, we don't believe that at all because that's not what our experience is. Our experience is that we're subject to all kinds of problems and guilt feelings, etc. Ultimately, this is a very important word, ultimately speaking, you are perfect. You always have been. You're a child of God and a perfect child of God, just as Jesus was. Yes. What Barry is it?
Yeah.
Barry.
I once heard a priest speak, and the essence of what he said was don't intellectualize about God, love God.
That's good.
So what do you think about that? And how, I asked him at the intermission, I asked him, how do you love God?
Mm-hmm.
And there was no answer from him.
Oh, well, it's easy. You love God by loving everything.
But isn't
Like-
that intellectualizing? I mean,
No, and then if you
gotta
take it into
feel
practice, you know, but by everything, I mean everyone, every circumstance, every encounter, whatever it is that we're doing, you have to think. I came across this book this last week or so, and I started writing about it. It's called The 100% 0% by a guy named Al Richter. Has anybody heard of this book? It's called 100% 0%. And what his suggestion is that we need to do is, if you really want to be happy, you are 100% loving with absolutely everyone all of the time. So then there's never a time that you're not being loving. And if you catch yourself, you stop it and you straighten it out for yourself, right? You go ahead and you be loving regardless of how you've just gotten mistreated, for example, or something, right? And then the 0%. The 0% is in exchange for your giving 100%, you expect nothing in return.
Yeah.
Zero. You expect nothing back. Right? Now, if you give 100% and you expect to get nothing back, you'll be happy. You know, it's like people complain, well, you know, he didn't appreciate my appreciating him or something like that. You know, and I never got a thank you letter. You don't have to get a thank you letter, right? I mean, nothing has to happen unless you decide something has to happen in your own mind, but then you've made that one who made that decision. And he talks about how if you do this, if you give 100%, 100% of the time, you expect zero coming back to you in exchange. It'll automatically have an effect. It will start affecting other people, and they will start acting in the same way. That's part of what the Course is talking about too. You don't have to do anything to make this happen. I mean, except to give 100%. I mean, but I think this is especially applicable to family life. It's especially applicable to any kind of environment where we spend a lot of work situation life, right? So you're just doing 100% unconditional, right? There was another hand here a moment ago. Or was it Don?
Yeah, I have a question. I believe I'm following this, and I have a situation that's been coming up for me repeatedly. So I have older children, and they have recently moved out, and they each had pets. And so now I'm home alone with these pets that I never had to care for. The kids always tended to them. And I can do okay like day 1, day 2.
You got a pet peeve?
And then I hit a wall. And what happens for me is this experience of like, I can't do this. And some of the issues I've worked on for myself in my life, I've done a lot of work. And I keep questioning, like, how is this happening? Like, I stand there and I'm like, so what's happening that I can't do this? And it's just, like, I'm so bewildered by sort of the simplicity of it, and it's so undeniable. Like, there's nobody there but me. And I like crash into this wall. So I'd just be curious what you have to say or help me with that.
I have no idea. Well, first of all, I guess the most obvious answer is why can't pets go with the kids?
Not yet, we're working on it.
You're working on it. Okay, well, you're working on it. So then you just have to make peace with your situation. Temporarily.
My peace leaves and nothing happens, and my peace leaves. Nothing happens.
That's silly.
It's so obvious to me that nothing is happening.
Right.
It's just an internal experience. Nothing has happened.
Okay, so who's in charge of make this decision?
Yeah, it's John, I want. Oh, it just drives me crazy.
Huh?
I want
Probably
a
lot of little
different, I
things
want a
like that
different
that drive all of us
experience.
crazy. Pardon?
I want a different experience.
Well, it's a choice, isn't it? I mean, it's a decision, isn't it?
It doesn't.
You know, so what you do
seem-
is you say to the Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, help me to see this differently. Help me to see this differently. And that's actually one of the exercises. And you can see it differently. It doesn't matter, make any difference what's going on. Let's go back to Nelson Mandela for just a second. So look at this situation. 27 years in prison, right? And he doesn't let it knock him down, right? I mean, he has to forgive the whole insane situation. Although he says it wasn't easy, but nevertheless, that's the triumph. That's what made everybody get excited, was that he didn't become bitter and upset about this thing that had happened to him. And he kept them. Probably everybody saw the news this week. So the love that he exchanged with the prison guard, right? Just for example, where they became really good friends. I mean, so he literally, you work with what you got. And this is what he had. He had this guard in prison that he could relate to on a heart-to-heart level. So we have to apply the same situation with our kids if we've got kids, or our mates if we've got mates, or whoever it is that we have to relate to in this world. The only way to be. Brad?
Can I just comment on what you just said, because something just came to me. You just said, you do fine with solving your own problems. You do fine with finding your own peace with your own issues. But when it comes to these pets, you lose yourself. Well, the Course says that every problem is the same problem, just shifting forms. So if you want a different experience with these pets, apply what you apply with the problems that you're resolving and finding peace to these different forms now that are appearing, because they're all the same.
Well,
Ruth, and then we're gonna take a break, because I'm just looking over here at Brad all the time.
Yes, so in John's situation, can take it forward. So prayer and the Holy Spirit.
Right.
How do you pray to the Holy Spirit? How would Dawn pray? How would I pray
Hmm.
to the Holy Spirit for an answer, and then know that what I'm hearing somehow is the answer?
Right. The Course talks about prayer as a kind of a communication. Okay? So it's a communication that's going on. It's where we recognize that we are making a connection. Right? And you just literally pray the way you would pray. I mean, you literally just think or talk if you want to, as though you were talking to God. Right? And recognizing I need direction, I need help in this area, and please be with me through this process. There's nothing wrong with praying for other people in the process as well. That all seems. I thought it was very interesting in both Anita Marjani's case. She had 3 different sets of people praying for her, and in even Alexander's case, he had a purpose. And that so in both instances, they were saying, and then also in the one Heaven is for Real about the little boy, you know, that they all seemed to think that really did help. What you're really doing is just getting the mind thinking in the right direction, right? So that you're not going down an ego path of building on a case of insanity, which the ego likes to do. You know, I mean, they like to find a problem and just amplify the problem in the mind. So we're going exactly the opposite direction. We're really saying, I need help, and I'm open to receiving that help. And then be quiet and listen and see if it's not there. And then we're going to take a break. Terrence, hold on for later.
Just want to say one thing. A book that I read many, many years ago, Man's Search for Meaning.
Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl.
Right.
That stayed with me throughout my life.
Right.
It was like sort of a path that one would want to, go on.
Sure.
Because that's exactly what, like a Mandela, what
Right.
he did. And I just wanted to say that was just such a gift to me.
Yeah. I used to use that when I taught a university class called Worldviews and Values. Okay, we do 10 minutes at 2:30?
John,